So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final event of this evening for Maple Leaf Mystery Conference. Tonight, we're going to have a panel of new voices in Canadian mystery, moderated by Jim Napier. So take it away, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jim Napier, and in an earlier life, I taught crime fiction and creative writing at both the college and university levels, but I took early retirement so that I could focus on writing full time. I published Legacy, my first novel, debut novel. This is what it looks like. And that was in 2017. And I followed that up with Ridley's War, the second in the series, in 2020. Both are police procedurals set in Britain. The third in the series, Family Matters, is slated for release in 2023. Now, we'll begin with a brief introduction to each of our panelists, followed by questions for them, make time at the ending for questions from our viewers, who we encourage to join in. Liz, Angus, can I ask you to lead off?
To be here, and what an honor to be invited. So I grew up in Alberta. I moved to Ontario as a student, and I've remained here ever since. I then shifted gears and spent a number of years working as a policy consultant and business writer. So after retiring, I returned to my first love, which was writing. I had a short story published in Black Hat in 2021. My debut suspense novel, Child, and here it is. Issue of the Big Thrill.
Tony, can we ask you to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Can you guys hear and see me okay?
Just fine.
Oh, great. So I'm originally from London, Ontario, and I moved out to Vancouver about 25 years ago. I've been writing for over 25 years, and you see this book? Oh yeah, great. Thank you very much. Just a second. That's better. The Amsterdam Deception is my my first book. The second one will be coming out this summer. And the interesting thing, it's a suspense thriller, and I have an unusual protagonist. My protagonist is a male ballet dancer from the National Ballet of Canada, and my inspiration is my wife went to the National Ballet School in Toronto, and so I've been around ballet for a long time. And I'm a computer guy, so I know more about ballet than I should, being in the computer industry. My day job, I work in product marketing for a software company based in Portugal, and I've worked for companies like Apple, Microsoft, and IBM, and I've luckily enough been sent around the world in various iterations. So I tend to write international mystery and spy thrillers.
That's great, Tony. Thank you. Jeremy, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
For sure. My name is JT Siemens, and I was born and raised in Vernon, British Columbia. I moved to Vancouver about 25 years ago and to become a personal trainer. And in doing so, I met people in the film industry, and they were always talking about screenplays. And so I did have an interest in writing. I studied screenwriting at SFU. And I wrote about a dozen screenplays, none of which went anywhere. I made the shift over to short story writing, and I was lucky to have a handful of short stories published in Vancouver Magazine and Mystery Weekly, Down in the Dirt, etc. But I wanted to write a novel, and so I did. And this is my this is my story, To Those Who Killed Me, and it was published April of this year by New West Press, and it's available in bookstores across the country. And that was a long road to publication, but I finally got it done, and here I am.
Thanks, Jeremy. Karen, tell us about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Before I begin, I just want to tell you I'm so honored to be part of the panel tonight and to meet Liz and Tony and JT and yourself. This whole conference has been fantastic, and I'm learning so much from every presentation, and of course from all the big names across Canada. So I live with my family in Toronto, and after a career as an educator and an exec at TVO, I turned my attention to writing. And my debut novel is The Dime Box. It's the story of a young woman who's accused of murdering her father. It was selected by Amnesty International as its spring 2021 book club novel to represent women's issues and really to spur conversation about gender inequality. And I spent a lot of time at my family cottage in the Kawarthas, which is where I wrote my second novel. The working title is When She Returned Home, and I'm currently planning a third.
Great, thank you very much. If we can go full circle back to Liz for a moment. Can you tell us a bit about your book in terms of where it's set, what the plot line is?
Sure. So Not Your Child is a suspense novel set in Ottawa. A single mother and her 12-year-old daughter are having trouble navigating the approach of adolescence when an older man shows up claiming the girl is actually his granddaughter who was abducted as a baby many years ago from an accident where her parents died. Then the 12-year-old girl disappears. The man, of course, is a suspect, but he has an alibi and there's no sign that he was involved in her disappearing. So the search to find the girl is on, and then we're into the book.
Thank you, Liz. JT.
To Those Who Killed Me. To Those Who Killed Me is set in Vancouver, in and around Vancouver. I'll take a little bit of a trip to Costa Rica within the novel. It's about Sloan Donovan, she suffers from bipolar disorder. She's an ex-cop who currently works as a personal trainer at an upscale country club. And she's returning from a run one day, and she discovers the body of a close friend of hers dead of an apparent overdose. And this sets a chain of events into motion where she believes that it's not a mere overdose, but it is in fact murder based upon knowing this woman and various factors that happened recently. And she's determined to find out the truth. And the truth leads her to some pretty dark areas involving teenage prostitution and human trafficking.
Thank you. Tony. Tony, can you tell us a bit about where your book is set and the major plot line? I think you have it on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. I love Zoom meetings. So as I said, I have an unusual protagonist. I have a Canadian male ballet dancer. On his first international tour in the Netherlands, he's walking around the Amsterdam red light district with a friend, and he's abducted and dragged into a clinic owned by a tech billionaire. The tech billionaire needs the location of a prototype of a kind of a virtual reality device, but the last person that knows about it was an ex-Cold War spy, and he's dead. And through a procedure, the last 30 seconds of the spy's memory is injected into David, the ballet dancer. But what happens is the spy's memories take over the ballet dancer, and basically have him escape, and he's walking around the kind of a cold Amsterdam night. The issue is that the televangelist needs the device destroyed. The tech billionaire needs the device saved to save his company, and David just wants to get his life back. And so it's a kind of a combination of I'm going to say Baryshnikov and Jason Bourne from a spy thriller point of view. It starts off in Amsterdam, goes to Paris, and then ends up in Silicon Valley.
Thanks, Tony. Karen, your book, I guess, is a departure from what we've heard so far.
Well, I guess a little bit, yeah. So as I said, it's a story of a young woman who's accused of murdering her father, and Greta is the main character, and the novel follows the events of her life. It's set across Ontario. So Kearney, Parry Sound, Bracebridge, Aurelia, Peterborough, Lindsay, Brantford, and Toronto. So Greta barely escapes being murdered by the man she grew up with. And she's not totally sure who Ian is, or really who she is, but she's determined to find out. So when she bolts from their secluded cabin in Northern Ontario and flees to Toronto, her new life comes at a price. Ian dies under suspicious circumstances, and a veteran detective, Astor Perez, believes Greta has the perfect motive. So through an intense police investigation, Greta is forced to dig really deep into her history and ultimately unlock the secrets of her family. And the novel is grounded in two of Canada's most significant public institutions, the justice system and the education system. The characters reflect Canada's diversity, and the themes are really ones that we need to take action for every day to build a more inclusive and just and equitable society. So things like poverty, marginalization, domestic violence, the search for identity, adoption, how we as a society define family. And through the novel, really every character is forced or faced with more dilemmas and forced to make difficult choices.
Thank you, Karen. That's quite a mouthful. Liz, if I can come back to you for a moment, how did you come to create the plot line of Not Your Child? Is it based on personal or work experience or something entirely different?
First, I have to apologize. People are having trouble seeing me. I'm getting notes on my computer saying my internet connection is unstable, so it may be a problem, but I can't do anything about it. So the idea for the story, first of all, came to me just as an image of someone showing up saying that your child is in fact not your child, that she belongs to them. So then to flesh out that image and to figure out how that might happen, what could lead to that and what from it, I drew really on two things. I guess on my professional experience with families and adolescents in crisis, and also on my own experience as a mother. I did briefly lose each of my two daughters, both times in crowded shopping malls. And if that's ever happened to anybody, you know how terrifying that is. Now, in my case, children were quickly located, thank goodness, but that immediate reaction, the panic and the guilt, knowing that they were gone and it was my fault, that's never forgotten. And I certainly drew on that for my mother's reaction when her child disappears in my novel.
Thank you, Liz. Jeremy, how did you come by your storyline?
I came by the storyline at work, actually. One of my colleagues a number of years ago, she actually stumbled across the aftermath of a murder that happened at the country club I in fact worked at the time. And it was a much more grisly murder, a much more violent murder than the one that I depicted in the novel. But she happened across the body, and it really, I sort of witnessed how it unhinged her in subsequent days, weeks, months, and she had to go testify in court and so on. I wrote a short story based upon that, and it was sort of experimental because I wrote it from the first person female, and it was well received. And in writing that short story, I found the voice of Sloan Donovan sort of came ready-made, and it gave me the confidence to attempt an entire novel in first person female narrative. So which was a bit of I felt was a bit of a risk at the time, but nonetheless one that I took. So it's based on a real life occurrence, and then I sort of spun an entire plot line around that, one that was quite a bit more complicated than the actual murder that occurred.
Super, thank you. Tony, what can you tell us about how you came to create the storyline?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So as I said, I've been able to travel around the world when I was in my career, and have so on the company dime, and I was writing suspense thrillers. I was reading lots of spy fiction at the time, and I was able to go to Europe a few times. And at the same time, so I was, being sent around by, IBM and Microsoft. And at the same time, my wife was going to the National Ballet School. And so I was around all these ballet dancers. And I remember really, really clearly, my wife and I were at a ballet in France. This is before children, when we had time. And it was the particular ballet was an all-male ballet. Like, the particular piece was all men at that one spot. And I had just realized how athletic the dancers are. And if you've ever seen a ballet, they are very athletic. They're Olympic style, Olympic quality dancers. And I'd met a lot of dancers with my wife, and realized that'd be a great character because it's unusual, right? And so I put that character in a in a stressful situation, and that's really how that came to be.
So art meets life.
Yeah.
Great. Karen, how did you come to get involved in the plot line? Any basis in personal or work experience?
Yeah, a bit of both. So the novels inspired by true experiences of the students I served throughout my career in education. And I was just struck by the power, right, and the generosity of their lives and their stories and their voices. Kids and youth today are inspirational. Our kids, our nieces and nephews, our grandchildren, they're really beacons of light, so energetic and bright. And I really believe our future is in great hands. So that was the work piece. The novel's personal as well. Like Greta in the story, I'm adopted. So writing The Dime Box really stirred up a lot of powerful emotions for me. I remember as a kid often being told on outings or, at parties, with my parents, oh, you look like a chip off the old block. And at the time, I really just laughed along. But later, I kind of wondered what it meant. I mean, how was that even possible? And, as I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at home, wondering who was this person who looked back at me? Like, why did I look the way I did? Who did I look like? My biological mother or father? So like every kid growing up, I struggled with my sense of identity. And back in the 70s and 80s, there weren't any books with characters that I found who were adopted, to take out the library or maybe at school. And I really wondered who I was and where I belonged, and was, kind of water thicker than blood or blood thicker than water, and how does society define a family? So when the confusion and grief and some of the loss inherent in being adopted occasionally surfaced, they added this additional dynamic to wrestle with as I came to know myself. And that part of my background, brought a really unique element to writing The Dime Box.
Thank you, Karen. If I can move back to Liz for a moment. I think we know the answer to this already, but I'm going to run it out there anyway. Your protagonist main character, what attracted you to that person?
Well, actually, I have three main characters. There's Susan, the single mother. There's Maddie, the missing girl. And there's Daniel, man claiming she's his granddaughter. Aspects of the story are told from each of their points of view. That gave me a way to explore the story and motivations from several sides, and from the point of view of people at 3 different ages. The 12-year-old girl, the mother in her 40s, the man in his 60s. They're each at different points in their lifespan. They're trying to navigate life, and they each have a different take on the challenges facing them. And I found that very interesting because I've lived all those ages, and just looking back at what motivates you at different times in your life is quite interesting to me.
Thank you, Les. Jeremy?
Yeah, Sloan Donovan is my protagonist, and she is ex-cop who had a falling from grace 6 years before the story opens. Sloan's sort of a composite of about at least a half a dozen different women that I was fortunate to work with over time. Very, very tough, very able, extremely athletic women that I worked with, and I think I probably I chose her because you know, I knew the person who discovered the body, but also because I thought it would be more interesting to write a female character who deals with problems, although she's very physically able and very athletic, in a non-violent way most of the time, using her wiles and other aspects of her athleticism. She's an elite level runner, which serves her very well in this. And I was also curious, initially when I started planning out the character, I didn't get into the mental illness issue at all, although she was very obsessive. And I had early readers tell me, you know, she sounds a lot like people I know who were bipolar. And I researched that enough, and in fact, I thought she could use this as an asset to solving the murder, and she in fact does. And so, yeah, I became very intrigued by that character.
That's an interesting way into your character. Thanks, Jeremy. Tony, I think we're getting a picture of your main character already, but I'm sure you can give us some more insight to that.
Sure. So David is so a lot of ballet dancers, male and female, they're attracted to the art because it's performance, right? And it's very precise, and so there's and you don't accidentally become a ballet dancer. You're really kind of drawn to it early on, and both my kids danced for several years, and my wife teaches ballet today. But at the same time, a lot of the ballet dancers are very focused on approval from outside themselves, right? So the artistic director, the ballet master, the ballet mistress, and so on in the audience. So he's he's like 22. He's out of the National Ballet School. He's sort of an apprentice in the National Ballet of Canada, and he's kind of fresh-faced and naive. He's also a bit of a smartass. As you read the book, he's got kind of an attitude, and it's almost a coming-of-age story because these spies' memories are kind of downloaded into him, kind of in a jumbled way, and he's kind of dragged, kind of kicking and screaming into sort of solving his own problems. So he sort of comes forward with that, and again, I'd met a lot of male and female dancers, and it was really fun to write it, that he sort of takes control of his life versus having somebody else determine sort of his life direction.
Great. And Karen, I think we're getting a fuller picture of how you came to your main character in any case, but can you build on that a bit?
Sure. Well, Greta is strong and feisty, and her story is one of resilience and heartache and triumph. And her emotions and her moods, her perceptions and her misperceptions were really wide ranging and a lot of fun to write. It's funny, as a new author, I thought writers create their own characters, but mine kind of came alive and leapt off the page, and I really realized that wasn't quite how it worked. Greta became really real for me. I don't know how many times, my family yelled up from upstairs, what on earth are you doing? Who are you talking to up there? And curious and at times a little feisty, saucy. Greta really had her own mind. So sometimes she'd just say, no, I'm not doing that. Here's what I'm doing. And I'd be, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? Anyway, all right. So just fasten my seatbelt, and she took the story to a whole new place. So I think in writing Greta, she really showed me how the process of character development is authentic. It's a partnership, right? So characters evolve as the writing evolves. And it's fascinating when they begin to reveal, their quirks and flaws and motivations. And as the plot thickens and the interaction between the characters deepens, each character's voice develops. And I was really amazed by the choices they want to make. One thing that was really interesting for me, Jim, was that maybe this is because I'm a new writer, I'm not sure, but I found it was a lot easier to write a character I admire or believe in, like Greta. It was much harder to write a character when that character is dark. So I really had to dig deep to evolve Ian and to ensure a reader felt chilled as they got to know him. And rather than just telling readers he was a monster, I had to determine what situations to put him in to show his character.
Interesting. Your experience bears out an American crime writer named Donald Westlake, who started a book about some priests in a monastery, and the idea was to make them villains. And as the book progressed, it was evident that they were taking on a life of their own, and they refused to fit those pigeonholes. And he had to change his plot entirely.
Ah, interesting.
I'm going to switch gears now and coming back to Liz for a moment. What have you found so far in your long and storied career as a novelist about being a writer?
Well,
Most
I'd say
challenging.
the most challenging thing is the actual writing. I've been a writer all my life, but most of my writing has been business writing. Learning to write fiction was a big challenge. When I did my first draft and then I looked for a bit, went back to it, I thought, really, this isn't a novel yet. Writing a novel is very different from writing a report or a business article. And I had a lot to learn, and I spent a lot of time learning it, both, the craft, characterization, pacing, and I'm still working at that, of course. And I think that one continues to learn. I heard an interesting interview the other day with Sarah Paretsky. She was commenting that a friend of hers had said, what you learn from writing a novel is how to write that novel, and it doesn't actually teach you how to write the next novel. So I'm hoping I've learned something, but I expect I'll still be learning.
Thanks, Liz. Jeremy.
The most challenging about being a writer. Well, I love the process of writing. I love the daily grind. I write. I stick to a pretty rigorous schedule. I mean, I still work as a personal trainer, so it's not a full-time job, but I work every day. I'm a big believer in needing momentum in my story, and if I finish a draft, I shift over to a short story, or I do something, even if it's just research, something that's related to the writing or tweaking or a revision or something. I don't really take breaks. Sometimes I scale it down a little bit, but I feel like I need that, and that's how you grow and improve on things. The hardest thing probably was actually getting out and taking advice from people and learning to accept criticism in my work. I was for a long time, I think what held me back was I was stubborn. People had some really valid points early on, especially with regards to this novel, and that I wasn't really willing to some little word changes, or use too much profanity, scale back the F-bombs or whatever. That's easy, but it wasn't until I actually sort of sat back objectively and sort of took heed of what some people were saying, and it was like a little flash. Like, okay, I'm going to try that, and it was a game changer for me. And I don't think the novel would have ever gotten published had I not made those changes. One was to the title. I was really stuck on this title that just wasn't as good. But a close writing friend, author, he made a suggestion and I took it. And another author suggested that I get rid of an exceptionally troublesome prologue that I kept in there for years. And I think it was actually holding me back. So those are the things. It's a learning process for me. You know, writing so there's a lot of personal growth in the process as well over the years. And hopefully I'm growing with time. Thanks.
So very much a journey of self-discovery for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tony?
So very similar to Jeremy, and I started writing about 20 years ago. It took me a long time to get to a first draft of this. It's a bit like, and I don't have a background in English, or you know, I took several courses and went to webinar or seminars and so on. But the two things that changed my writing was, one, to learn timed writing, and I took a couple of my mentors that are down in Seattle taught a timed writing course at the Surrey Writers Conference a few years ago that changed the way I do things, because the editor gets out of the way as you're writing. So that broke through some things. And then I did National Novel Writing Month, probably started that about 10 years ago. And I learned that I had more than one novel in me, right? Because I was crafting my first novel like it was a crystal vase. You didn't want to touch it or break it. And I realized with NaNoWriMo that I'm the process about sort of writing with your hair on fire made a huge difference to my writing. And so the writing process I like. I'm kind of like Jeremy. I write almost every day, and some days more, some days less. But the biggest issue I'm finding, the biggest part of my writing journey is once it's published, is the marketing, actually, is getting it out there and doing doing these kinds of things in order to get recognized. I have a full-time job, and I've got some good things about it. I work from home, but I'm generally kind of an introvert, so sort of doing self-promotion like this is even challenging. So that's I find I like the writing. It's a struggle, like for most of us, but the promotion is equally challenging.
Thanks. And Karen, what can you tell us?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure whether to tell you my challenges alphabetically or categorically. So the dime box, well, it was a story that kept calling out to me. So one day I shared the premise with a colleague at work, and he said to me, "Oh, so giddy up, write it. How hard can it be?" Ha, famous last words. So 5 years and 27 drafts later, here we are. So I think I've learned a fair bit. When I started, I really wrote for just pure joy, total pantser. But as the time went on, I recognized a lot. So while the first process, the process of that first messy draft is really exciting, I found it frustrating when a specific scene didn't flow the way it needed to. And now, though, I understand as drafts evolve, like everyone else has said, I can go back to those tricky scenes and write them with the detail and the color and the depth they need. Like JT said, like I've learned writing's not solitary. It's a team sport. So I'm totally indebted to early readers and the more experienced writers who shared their craft so generously, and editors. Oh, mine's fabulous. Her insights are remarkable. Every story, right, needs an editor, and great editors make every great story better. So one of the other things I've really learned, and was challenged initially, but I've learned how important research is to fiction. And while I'm familiar with education, I really had limited knowledge of the justice system. Luckily, I had a friend who answered my fire hose of questions, so that was helpful. And throughout the whole process, really, I've been really amazed how generous people are when you're a new writer and you reach out with questions. So I'll tell you a really quick story. There's a scene in the novel that takes place about 20 years ago in a mall parking lot up in Parry Sound. And I was having trouble with it. So I kind of took a flying leap, and I called the Parry Sound Tourist Center and asked if I could speak to someone who might be able to help. And as the phone rang, I did realize they might think I was a bit odd. But when I explained what I needed, the voice on the other end of the line said to me, oh yeah, that's Marge. She's worked there since, way back then, but you better be quick and call her because she's retiring at the end of the summer. So I ended up calling Marge, and for the next hour, she described every shop, the whole parking lot, even the shops, the style of the shopping carts back then. So all that being said, I've tried to overcome those challenges and learn, but really I've been way more challenged writing my second novel. And over the course of COVID, like everyone else, I took a lot of online webinars and courses about the craft of writing. Sisters of Crime Toronto, Sisters International, Crime Writers of Canada. They've been fabulous resources. And now I'm more aware of the craft, putting those new skills to practice. It's been harder the second time through. I'm more intentional when I'm writing, and I'm probably harder on myself now. And I think I've swung a bit too, adopting some of those more helpful practices of a plotter.
Thank you, Karen. Now I'm going to try something a bit ambitious, but I think we have the time to do it. I'm going to ask each of you if you can read a short passage from your work, something on the order of 1.5 to 2 pages or 3 to 4 minutes that you think our readers will be interested in. And again, I'll start with Liz.
Okay, I'm going to read a scene with Susan, who's the mother of the 12-year-old. I rushed in the door after a long day at the clinic. Maddie was upstairs in her room. I hardly ever saw her for dinner anymore. Chicken breasts were thawing on the counter, and I was rinsing vegetables at the sink when the phone rang. It was Nicole Abada. Susan, did Maddie mention about a man following her and Emma today? What? No, I haven't talked to her yet. Emma said there was an older man with a dog. He was outside the school this afternoon, and when they got to the park, he crossed the street behind them and followed them along the pathway. He was behind them all to your house. What do you mean to our house? That's what she said. Both went inside and watched out your window. He came up the steps from the park, stood on your street and stared at your house. A prickle of unease washed over me. Are you serious? She's sure he was following them. My unease grew. Did she say anything else? Not really, but Matthew and I don't like it. Why don't you talk to Maddie, find out if she noticed anything more, and call me back after? Sure. I hung up and stared, unseeing at the bowls draining beside the sink. Emma's parents and I try to coordinate our rules for the girls, since they're best friends and do everything together. This fall, we agreed to let them roll on their own, now that they were 12. Their route through our small park and along a few busy streets seemed safe enough. Maybe we were wrong. Dinner could wait. I called upstairs to Maddie. After a long minute, she opened her door and came to the top of the stairs. Am I in trouble? Why was that the first thing out of her mouth? It's not like I'm always on her case, though sometimes she acts like it. No, but I want to ask you something. She slouched down the stairs and sat on the bottom step, staring at her hand. Her hair, released from its ponytail, fell forward over her face in a blonde curtain. I wanted to brush her hair aside, but restrained myself. Sweetie, I started. She frowned at me, glowering. She'd told me not to call her that anymore. I began. Nicole says a man followed you and Emma today. She wrapped her arms around her knees. Yeah, there was a guy, but it was no big deal. Was he really following you? Maybe. She shrugged. He was behind us for a while, and then he came up and stood up out front. Did he say anything to you or approach you? No. She tucked her hair behind one ear, but he did stay in front of our house for a while. Kind of weird. What did he look like? She shrugged again. He was just some old guy. He had a dog with him, a big yellow one. I sighed. Why didn't you phone or at least tell me about it when I came home? She rolled her eyes. Why? We handled it. Emma came into our house until he went away. She bit her lip. Maybe he was just lost.
Thank you, Liz. I think that gives us a good sense of what their relationship is like. JT, can you favor us with the passage?
Yes, this is the opening of the book. So where Sloane makes the discovery. Chapter 1. The brunette in the silver Audi convertible was dead. Even from 30 feet away, I knew from the stillness and the angle of her slumped head down and to the right. I had seen that angle before. As I approached the rear of the vehicle, blood slammed through my neck and temples, my body still buzzing with endorphins from my 12-mile run up and down the hills of West Vancouver. As I came closer, I saw the small woven dream catcher hanging from the rearview mirror. My throat made a strangled sound as I stopped breathing. It was my friend Jerry's car, and she was in the driver's seat. Jerry, oh my God. I sprinted to the convertible, shouting her name as I reached in and shook her shoulders. Her head lolled further down and her skin was pale where normally it was olive. I pushed my fingers through her thick hair to check for a pulse that wasn't there. Bringing my face near hers, I couldn't feel any breath, though the smell of wine was strong. An open swell bottle sat in the center console. The car's digital clock read 4:24 p.m. An unsealed white envelope and an iPhone sat on her lap. On the floor mat of the passenger side was an open bottle of prescription pills, some of which had spilled out, Zolpidem, sleeping pills. I pulled out my phone and called 911. My name is Sloane Donovan. I found a woman in her car who seems to have OD'd on sleeping pills, no vitals. Hillside Country Club, 930 Cross Creek Road, West Vancouver, end of the South Service Road. Yanking open the driver's door, I got my hands under her armpits and dragged her onto the road. Her phone clattered onto the gravel nearby. As I knelt to begin CPR, everything around me constricted, swirled, and blurred. The trees, the car, my friend on the road. A second later, reality came roaring back. Impossible. I'd spoken to her only a few days earlier. This was wrong, a waking nightmare, a sick joke. Interlacing my fingers together, I pumped her sternum. After 30 compressions, I tilted her head back, pinched her nose, lowered my lips to hers, and gave 2 breaths. Following 3 more cycles of CPR, I thought I saw her facial muscles twitch. Another cycle. One of her brown eyes was partially open. 5 cycles, no response. Another cycle, nothing. In the polished chrome rim of the rear wheel, I caught a distorted reflection of myself. Eyes wild, red ponytail bobbing up and down. In the branches of a hemlock above, a crow mocked me and flew off. Give up, it seemed to say. No. A drop of sweat from my face splashed onto Jerry's blue lips, rolled down her cheek before getting lost in the twisted gully of her ear. After countless rounds of CPR, I got dizzy and had to stop and breathe and shake out my hands. Only then did I take in the tight red and black silk cocktail dress she wore, its pattern like angry Japanese characters. Her fingernails were painted the same red as her dress. Her wedding ring was off. So was one of her black leather pumps, probably still in the car. 20 feet in front of us sat a rusty blue shipping container. Beside it were several stacks of old tires and a pile of discarded lumber. Country Club junkyard. I continued CPR. The phone buzzed on the gravel nearby. As I pumped her chest, I glanced over. The display read payphone 604-615-6761. From habit, I quickly recited the number under my breath before going back to mouth, running the digits through my head a few times so they stuck. Sirens howled beyond the trees. I saw the envelope a few feet away. The sirens grew louder. I remembered finding Steph's note on the bedside table and reading the words that would haunt me forever. I'd made the mistake of showing the note to my mother, thinking she needed to know. She didn't. I grabbed the envelope and shoved it into the waistband of my tights, pulling my shirt over it just before a fire engine crested the rise.
Thank you, Jeremy. Strong narrative, really races along. Tony, can you tell us a bit about your opening lines?
Sure. This is chapter 1, Amsterdam, February 28th. David Knight felt in his bones that someone was watching him. Walking along the icy cobblestones and narrow bridges, he couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe it was the jet lag or the grueling rehearsals, or maybe it was the cold. Canada was cold, but the wind blowing off the North Sea chilled him faster than getting rejected from one of the troupe's female dancers. He'd wished he brought a hat to cover his long blonde hair, but his friend Razor said that he didn't need one. He'd never listen to him again. A shiver went up his back and he spun around trying to catch whoever was looking at him, but no luck. Lots of people walked the streets of Amsterdam. Some pulled suitcases, some wore backpacks. A few darker skinned men stood with their backs to the corners with hands in their pockets. Maybe drug dealers, but none gave him or Razor a second glance. He and his friend Frederick Razur faced a skinny alleyway, rough brick on both sides. This one looked newish, as in less than 100 years old. Other alleys appeared plucked from the 18th century and inserted into the streets like Lego blocks. But the fact remained that he and Razor were lost in a city that was lost in time. Hard to determine what direction they were going, and the crappy tourist map Razor snatched from the hotel didn't help. Nice of you to charge your phone before we left, David said. Razor sneered at him and stared at the map. You have a phone too, smartass. I didn't think I'd be making any calls tonight, right boy? Look, we've been here for an hour, David said. He zipped up his leather jacket and tightened the scarf around his neck. Let's just grab a cab and head back to the hotel. He wanted to crawl back into bed and drift off. The show opened tomorrow and every muscle ached from his ballet class in the morning and the grueling rehearsals all afternoon. Look, we're virtually there, Razor said. Do you want me to tweet that you were too tired to go out tonight? Besides, what did your dad say in his final breath? David turned and said, it wasn't his final breath. He told me several weeks before he died. Razor cupped his hand to his ear. He says, okay, what was his words of wisdom? David grunted. Yeah, life is there to be lived. And what else? David confided to Razor about his dad. Don't waste it like I did. My point exactly, Razor said. His coat hung open. Cold didn't seem to affect him. Back in Canada, he wore shorts most days, but maybe he was some kind of android or alien. All right, well, let's just go. I'm freezing my ass off. Razor pulled out his tourist map, checked the street sign, and pointed. It's this way, he said. David touched the bump on the side of his head and grimaced. Before leaving for Europe, he told Sophie that he might want to see other people. In a wordless response, she'd thrown a copy of Gahel Gabram's The Prophet and he gave her at his head, and he caught him on the temple. Her anger didn't make the process any easier, and since the split, he didn't realize how much he missed the scent of her desert rose perfume she dabbed behind her ears, or how much he missed the clean smell of her auburn hair and her soft and yielding lips. Tonight in Amsterdam, however, all he smelt was incense, weed, and dog shit, and all he felt was cold.
Wow, nice combination of narrative and dialogue. Thank you. Karen?
Yes, thanks. Okay. Oh my God, these are so good. So I'm going to just set the scene. This is not the opening of the novel. This is the end of chapter 2. And Greta has walked into the Toronto Police Headquarters, which is on College Street in Toronto. And she's meeting Detective Perez for the first time. So here we go. Detective Perez jetted her chin towards the machine on the edge of the desk. I'm taking the conversation. You okay with it? Greta's face fell. Is it taping us now? Yes. Why? Didn't my officers tell you? I need your statement recorded. Greta's mouth went dry. She didn't answer. She couldn't even breathe. She blocked out everything around her. No, she didn't remember. She had zero recollection. She thought harder. Okay, maybe something, but it was vague. Ready? Detective Perez held up her pencil. What's the relationship with your father? There isn't one. When did you last see him? I told you, Saturday. I meant before he died. Greta could see him lying there, cold and rigid in the hospital bed, as he was probably found, but that wasn't how she remembered him. When was their confrontation? She said, last year sometime? Can you describe what happened Saturday night? The pit in Greta's stomach grew. How could she explain it? Less than 48 hours had passed, yet she couldn't account for the time. So not much to tell. I took the streetcar there, visited, took the streetcar back, end of story. When you saw him, did you talk? I don't think so. Did you touch anything when you were there? No. Well, the bed rail maybe. Was there any physical contact at all? No. When you arrived, did you see the nurse on duty? Greta looked up to her right. Think, who was it? I don't think so. Did you let the nurse know when you left then? No. She couldn't quite picture. Was she supposed to tell the nurse? Was the nurse supposed to know? Was that a rule? Someone might have yelled at her, but she couldn't recall what they said. Maybe? Detective Perez put her pencil down. I'm missing something. You were there, but you can't remember 2 days ago? In the room less than 5 minutes, Greta knew the detective probably thought she sounded insane or was lying. She chewed the skin on her bottom lip. I can't be sure. Let me help you then. We have someone who saw you there, Detective Perez said. So for the record, one more time, you were there, correct? Greta nodded. Dr. Hammond called me to tell me my father was dying of cancer. Detective Perez lifted a hand and tucked a wisp of her hair into her silver clip. Is this something you experience often, these lapses? Greta looked at her, trying to determine what to say. She opened her mouth to respond, but the detective was quicker. All the time? Sometimes? Certain times? At times. The detective's jaw clenched. Color rose up along her neck and into the sides of her face. What times? She said. Greta sucked in her breath. Eyes to the floor, she bit her cheek as she searched for the words to describe what she felt back in the cabin that first day. Confusion, anger, fear.
Thank you, Karen. I could squeeze in another question, but I wonder if it isn't worthwhile going to some of our viewers and responding to questions they've had. We've got an interesting question. Peyton?
Hey, everyone. Yep, we've got a couple questions in the chat. We've got 4 questions. So Mangus is wondering, they said that they haven't found sources on, sorry, they haven't been able to find many generous sources about trusting unpublished and unestablished writers, and they're wondering what keys to establishing trust in making contact in the industry.
Thank you, Peyton. Would anyone like to respond to that?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but it's the question of as a new writer connecting with other writers. I think that's what this refers to, and whether you can trust someone you haven't met before. And this actually raises something that Karen talked about, which is how important it is to the writing community is so important, and it's something that we can all learn from. What I can say is that the other writers that I've connected with have been largely through other organizations, through Sisters in Crime, or Capital Crime Writers, for example. So if you know writers that other writers have connected with, that gives you some sense of understanding. And of course, then there's local writing groups where you meet the people. But so it's a mix, but it really is essential to find people both as early readers. Jeremy talked about this, how important it is to get feedback from other people who can read something you've written and give you the feedback that you can't get. Your own eyes can't see it with fresh eyes, but somebody else can. And also to get feedback from more experienced writers who have gone through the learning process and can help you understand where you might learn. So those are my thoughts about this, but I think that if you can find a common connection with somebody, then you perhaps can have more confidence in whether to deal with them.
Thanks, Liz. And maybe if we can broaden out the question a bit, because it is a little bit difficult to be sure what they might be getting at. What about publishers and editors? Making contacts there and breaking through the ice.
It's incredibly challenging. I finally got a publisher, a small independent publisher out of Texas that I queried directly because I have an unusual character, right? So there was some challenges there, but the publisher, took a chance on me. Now that the pandemic, there's light at the end of the tunnel, we think, of the pandemic. More in-person events, being able to meet agents, meet editors, meet publishers in real life makes a huge difference. So that you can, but you have to query. It's a numbers game. You've got to have the best query letter. Your manuscript has to be in the best shape. one agent told me from at a conference I was at that even though she requests, give me 10 pages, she'll request, these kind of partials, 10%, she only gets 10% of those back. So even though somebody's got a request, there's lots of authors that don't end up sending the request. So you've got a query, you got to have the best query letter. Get your friends to take a look at the query letter. There's lots of research, but it's a numbers game. You've got to sell it, and you've got to till you finally get a hit from an agent or a publisher.
Thanks, Tony. Maybe we can move to a second question, Peyton, from the viewers.
Yeah, the next question is from Wendy, and she would like to know, what mystery writers do each of you compare your style of writing to?
I can start on that. I've got it's a long list, but if I was to narrow it down, Gillian Flynn is one, Michael Connolly, Joe Nesbo, Don Winslow, Tana French, and George Pelicanos, of course. He might be one of the more influential. Those are authors I've never met a single one of those people, but their work always resonated with me, and I aspired to that level of crime fiction and fiction and storytelling in general. And so I always felt a bit of you feel a kinship with certain authors, and they're my idols, and that's what I aspire to.
That's a pretty heady list.
It is. I want to aspire to be all those writers too. I write psychological suspense, so my writing is similar to other writers who write that genre, like Joey McMillan or the names escape me right now. But I think there's a common style that a lot of psychological suspense writers have, and I guess that's what I aspire to. Certainly, those are the ones I read to get myself in the mood. I read a lot of the writers that Jeremy mentioned too, but I don't think I model myself on them.
Good point. You're your own model.
I think there's a benefit to modeling through film, documentaries in film and other mediums of storytelling as well. So just to make, bring it down to earth. For example, the second novel I'm working on, I would model it after the spirit of Ozark. It's a little bit different. It's a domestic suspense, all from husband and wife point of view who don't get along. But I think there's great benefit in film and other types of medium for us to look at.
I remember reading James Patterson for the first time and realizing you can have a chapter in 2 pages. So it's like,
Yeah.
Can you be that short? Oh my God. And so I started writing, shorter scenes, and I fell in love with, like many people, with Lee Child. And so I find my writing is more sparse. Like his is very sparse, and I actually have to work to boost it up to be more a little more colorful. But I try and do short sentences, punchier verbs, punchier images, but I also have these, I seem to write these somewhat complex sort of spy plots, so there's a lot of sort of spy writers, the Bourne Identities, which is the author's name is escaping me, but I tend to write these complex stories with a fairly sparse narrative.
Thanks, Tony. We're getting to the end of our time here, and I want to be sure that we get in a word to viewers about where readers can find your books. And I want to begin by mentioning that most of these writers' books can be ordered through the online Maple Leaf Murder Bookstore by using the link on the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference. You can also get them at Perfect Books in Ottawa, at the Library Clio in Montreal, at the Whodunit Mystery Bookstore in Winnipeg. And all of those links can be found on the Maple Leaf Conference website. Is there any other source that people here now would like to mention for their books?
Well, we can't leave out the online sources.
Or you
Yes.
mean the big A?
The big A,
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble,
Yeah.
you know, some of those. And the, you know, don't forget the public library.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was very excited to see that my book is available online with Walmart in the US.
Oh, that's tremendous. That's a
Terrific.
huge market.
Yeah, I recently discovered people sending me photos of my book appearing in places like London Drugs here in BC in various locations and Save on Foods.
Excellent.
That was completely unexpected to me. Very
That's so great.
pleasantly surprised.
Great. I'd also like to thank, and I'm sure the panel would like to join me in thanking all of the people who have made this possible through the Maple Leaf Conference. And that includes Peyton here, for starters. It also includes Alex and Eric and Michael and Mike Martin. But everybody who's labored behind the scenes to make it come off, because we all know there's a lot of organization goes into something this big. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And thanks to the writers for being so generous with their time and joining in on this. Hopefully it's the first of more to come.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Good night,
Great, thank you.
everybody. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
So
bye-bye.
much for that, Jim, and for that panelist and everybody. Our next event is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And also a shout out to Gavin on Tech for doing some work this evening as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, bye-bye.